You're listening to Myers-Briggs Question Corner with Edythe Richards. Edythe, I've been wanting to ask you this question for a really long time, but I wasn't sure if it was appropriate or if you would take it seriously. Now, as you know, I have got 2 cats, and I know you're an animal lover too. So here's my question. Can animals have a Myers-Briggs type?
Hi, David, and thanks for having the courage to ask this question. Those of us who are pet owners and animal lovers and Myers-Briggs fans have surely asked this question themselves at one time or another. I know I have. And of course, I've got my pets all typed.
Oh, really? And how did you manage to do that?
Pretty much the same way I'd type a human, which goes to say that type watching or trying to figure out someone else's Myers-Briggs type may lead to stereotyping and bias, which is not what we want to achieve. We also have to remember that behaviors and tendencies that people, or in this case animals, exhibit to the external world may or may not be indicative of their true type. That is, who they are most authentically and naturally.
Yes, you've talked about the dangers of typecasting before, Edythe, and I do understand it can be potentially dangerous and misleading to do so, even with pets. At the same time though, once you get an understanding of the assessment, you almost can't help yourself.
I know, and I'm guilty of it too. I just make sure I remind myself that each person is a unique individual with unique experiences and strengths apart from a personality type.
And as you say, that goes for animals and cats and dogs in this case too.
Yes, it sure does. So you've had how many cats over your lifetime, David?
Oh, wow. I'd have to think about that. We'll say 4 in recent times. I've got 2 at the moment. It would be a lot more if I was including living with my parents.
Okay, and would you say that each one had his or her own unique personality?
Oh, absolutely. And like people, cats share common traits, like being a bully or having social anxiety, which is what one of mine has at the moment because of noise problems with a new next-door neighbour.
Oh, I see. Is this a current issue that you're facing?
Yeah, it kind of is. But anyway, I've got 2 cats at the moment, Mr. Blue and Mr. Black. Now, Mr. Blue, he's just like a schoolyard bully. He smacks me when I walk by, for example. It's like he's plotting something all the time. If I trip over some little cat toy he's left on the floor, probably on purpose, he gets this glimmer in his eye, like he enjoys watching me keel over in pain. He's also far more independent and less affectionate than my other cat. He doesn't really like being picked up. Rarely does he allow you to pet him. I'd say Mr. Blue sees himself as a leader, or the head honcho, the big cheese, the top dog, or top cat in this case. Now, Mr. Black, he's also a trickster, but in a friendlier way. He'll rub against my legs and purr. He comes to the door when I get home. But it's not just me. He goes to the door to greet all visitors. And he'll sit with us in the living room as well, with a smug look on his face. It's almost saying, "Admire me." Yes, Mr. Blue is a curious fellow indeed.
They sound like 2 completely different cats. Do they even look alike?
Actually, they do. They're both black and white. Mr. Black is more black than white, and Mr. Blue is 50-50 black and white.
Right. It's really interesting how each pet, like each person, has a distinct personality.
It's true. I always think of cats as being the animals who plan ahead and they're naturally devious. I never thought we could seriously type them though, not in the Myers-Briggs sense. I would actually have asked this question long ago if I'd thought you would have taken it seriously, Edythe.
Well, type watching itself, as I've explained before, isn't always something to take seriously. There are dangers in it, and it often reveals more about you and your own biases than the person or the animal, in this case being typed. So as far as Myers-Briggs for cats and dogs, I'll just leave it as a fun thing we can do to honor the personalities of our beloved pets and practicing what we know about the Myers-Briggs type indicator.
So shall we break it down for our listeners? The 4 dichotomies and how they play out with my 2 cats, Mr. Blue and Mr. Black.
Sure, let's start with the easy dichotomy, extroversion versus introversion. As we know, we all use both in our daily lives, but there's one that's more natural. Extroverted types prefer to be stimulated by external events and people, and they take action, while introverted types prefer to be on their own and tend to be more solitary.
So, Mr. Black is definitely an extrovert. He loves being social, and he's a real prima donna in a way. Very attention-seeking. He's a good-looking boy too, and he knows it. Mr. Blue, on the other hand, I'd say he's an introvert. He hides for hours and hours, but then he comes out to play, or watch me fall flat on my face. He gets a good laugh from that.
Yes, so you said. Talk about a cunning feline.
Yeah, he is. But, like you said, we all use both extroversion and introversion. So I'll venture to say that Mr. Blue's tricks are his feeble attempts to be an extrovert. But overall, he prefers introversion. Yeah, he's definitely the type to go off alone to plot his revenge.
Well, we have that figured out. Let's move on to the second dichotomy, sensing versus intuition. Sensing types prefer tangible, concrete information and use their five senses to process and take what they get at face value. They like facts and they're attuned to details. Intuitive types prefer the intangible. They use their sixth sense to notice general concepts, theories, and abstract ideas. They prefer to talk about what things mean or symbolize.
This is going to be harder. I'm going to guess that Mr. Blue is an intuitive type. But that could be my own bias coming into play, because I'm an intuitive. Anyway, the way I see him as master of his own domain is like a king who's watching over his owners, pondering how I can make their lives miserable. Something I've been told about myself is that I appear to be too intellectual and hard to read, that other people think I'm superior. And from what I understand about the Myers-Briggs, that's a negative stereotype sensors sometimes have about intuitives.
Yes, intuitives are often perceived as having their heads in the clouds, having unrealistic goals, too many ideas, and not enough facts, like the absent-minded professor.
I've called myself that more than once. But Mr. Blue, I guess I've always felt a kinship to him just because I kind of see myself in him. Or maybe he sees himself in me.
So who was it who said that pets resemble their owners?
I don't know, but I know a lot of pets who do resemble their owners.
So let's say, for argument's sake, that Mr. Blue is an intuitive. How about Mr. Black?
Mr. Black. I'm going to say that he's a sensor. And again, this is tough, but I think I'm on the right track.
A sensing type. Okay, explain yourself, David.
Okay, well, Mr. Black, he loves to be pet, and he loves to be admired. Now, I myself would consider these to be superficial traits. And again, my own bias at work here, these are traits I associate with sensing and the sensory world. And being touched is one of those sensory experiences. And Mr. Black loves to eat too. He's always ready for food.
That's interesting. I've got a cat who I'm convinced is a sensing type because he constantly grooms himself. He is the cleanest cat or the most OCD cat I've ever had. I figure he loves the feeling of his tongue against his skin because he's pretty much licked off all his fur on his belly. And he's absolutely compulsive about having a clean litter box. He tends to get all out of sorts when his box needs changing.
Yes, very interesting. My Mr. Black, he is pretty clean. Maybe not that much though. But I'd say yes, he's a sensor.
Okay, that's settled. So let's move to thinking and feeling. What do you remember about this dichotomy, David?
Okay, thinking and feeling. This is the one about making decisions. Thinkers make decisions based on truth as the objective. They tend to be logical, perhaps emotionally distant. They spend more time and energy on their own projects and less meeting the needs of others. Now, feelers, they're more attuned to their own emotions and the emotions of others. And they base their decisions on harmony and how it will affect other people.
Impressive, David. Well done. This is another hard one to gauge in cats, don't you think?
Yes, it surely is. But I'm apt to say that most cats are thinkers.
No, my current cat is a feeling type. He is so sensitive. He's so aware of my emotions, and he seems to know when I need him to comfort me and when I want him to back off. My previous cat was like that too. She was just a very sweet, sensitive soul.
That's interesting, yeah. Well, maybe it's my own experience with cats then. I'd say both Mr. Blue and Mr. Black are thinkers. They both want what they want, and they don't care a monkey's about their humans. We're just servants to them, to my two. Now, Mr. Black can be pretty affectionate at times, but so can thinkers, yeah?
Of course, just because you prefer thinking doesn't mean that you don't have feelings.
Haha, I'm probably a prime example of that. Now, how about the last dichotomy, Edythe?
Right, judging and perceiving. This is all about our orientation to the world. Judging types like an organized approach to life. They plan, plot, check off items on their to-do lists, and may be seen as uptight and no fun.
Yeah. And perceiving types have too much fun.
And we perceiving types can be disorganized and not mindful of timeliness. I'm going to say that my cat is a J because he's very predictable, he loves his routines as many cats do, and when something sets him off kilter, like a change in our schedules, he has a real hard time adjusting and he just gets more nervous than usual.
A lot of cats seem to like predictability. I think I remember Jackson Galaxy, the guy from the TV show My Cat from Hell. He was talking about that. I think Mr. Blue is definitely a judger. Like your cat, he seems to enjoy his routines and likes order in his life. Now, my Mr. Black, he doesn't seem to mind a few odd changes to routine, and he's definitely not a neat freak. So let's say that Mr. Black is a perceiver.
Great, so what Myers-Briggs types do we have?
Well, let's see now. Mr. Blue would be an INTJ, just like me. I have to say he's actually a lot like me. Cold and aloof. But once he gets to know you, he warms up and becomes selectively affectionate. He's devious too and strategic in his own way. He's definitely not impulsive. Oh, and a control freak, which I know is a trait of INTJs.
I've known a few INTJ types like that, I admit. How about Mr. Black?
So Mr. Black, now I think he is an ESTP. Can you remind us about this type, Edythe?
ESTP types are playful, life of the party, tend to live in the moment, are action-oriented jokesters, and they're very energetic people, often athletes or foodies or both. We'll often see ESTPs chatting playfully with others, partying, not a lot of long-term planning or serious discussions going on with them.
Now, I don't know about the athlete part, but the other parts sound about right for Mr. Black. He really does like to play and he loves his toys.
Well, there you have it then. Now, interestingly enough, did you know about a feline study that was done a few years back in Australia?
You mean on cats and personality?
Yes, quite fascinating to me anyway.
Oh wow, yeah, to me too. Tell us more.
Well, apparently researchers administered personality tests to about 3,000 domestic cat owners in Australia and New Zealand.
Wow.
And they essentially correlated the results to the big 5 personality traits in humans: extroversion, agreeableness, openness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. There's also enough studies to indicate that cats, like humans, have a basic personality that shows up differently from day to day based on environmental factors. So just like with humans, they all have to compensate.
Understandably so. Like me, I'm an introvert by nature, but being on this podcast series with you, Edythe, has kind of forced me out of my comfort zone. But I can tell you this, I'm never going to be an extrovert.
Well, a leopard can't change its spots. So, David, let's sum up a few things for our listeners about Myers-Briggs cats and dogs.
Well, we didn't get too much into dogs. We might have to do another one for that. But hopefully the cat people out there will appreciate this one. I guess the biggest takeaway for me is that traits linked to the Myers-Briggs assessment, they're pretty human-specific at the end of the day, except for extroversion and introversion. So typing animals is more of a fun thing to do. and shouldn't be taken too seriously, of course.
Right, and with that said, every animal, just like every human being, has his or her own unique personality traits. As we always say, personality is just one piece of the pie in what makes us human, and it doesn't measure things like ability or interests or how past experiences and our family and culture shape who we are.
Well said. Now, very interesting conversation, Edythe. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer this question, and any excuse to talk about my cats.
Thank you for asking the question, David. It was a really fun conversation for me too.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you'd like to hear more, or you'd like to submit a question yourself, then you can find us at www.atopcareer.com. Until next time. MBTI and Myers-Briggs are registered trademarks of the MBTI Trust.